Joining us now is Cormac Mac Fhionnlaoich, marine biologist, local guide and narrator of the stunning new TG4 series Ailtte Cliffs, raised on the towering edge of Sliabh Liag and now guiding along the Cliffs of Moher in the Burren. Cormac brings a rare insider's perspective to Ireland's wild Atlantic cliffs. In this powerful two-part documentary, he weaves science, folklore, wildlife and lived experience into a love letter to these ancient giants and the communities and creatures shaped by them. Cormac, a very good morning to you.
Good morning to yourself.
Thank you very much for being with us. This new series feels deeply personal. Can you talk about growing up and how that childhood shaped your relationship with the cliffs and ultimately led to this programme?
Well, yeah, I suppose the beginning of the programme, it sort of follows. The idea initially was to follow cliffs, I suppose, down along the west coast of Ireland. And because I'd been brought up on Sliabh Liag, on those cliffs, it felt like that was the way to start. And I've ended up as an adult living down here in County Clare on the Cliffs of Moher. So it was really sort of tying part of my own life through with that geological story down the coast.
You've described Sliabh Liag as your garden fence, albeit a 600 metre tall garden fence. When did you first realise, Cormac, these cliffs were more than just a backdrop to your life?
It's hard to say. Hard to say in a way, like, because you grow up on them, you kind of assume that other people are sort of having a similar, upbringing or existence to you when you're a kid. And I suppose it wasn't until, like, I knew they were special because we had tourists coming up and visiting them, and obviously I was spending time on them. But I suppose when I went to college over in Scotland when I was about 17. And you start meeting new people and you're having the same conversation. You're pretty much explaining where you come from and how you were brought up. And it was sort of there it began dawning on me that compared to other people, I'd kind of grown up in a fairy tale almost, that not everybody got to kind of live in a place that was that spectacular. And I'd maybe taken it for granted a little bit.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, that's natural. A lot of people who have brilliant things on their own back doorstep take it for granted. But we can see the wonders of it all in Ailtte, which explores geology, wildlife, mythology and human history. You are a marine biologist, and I'm just wondering, with that role in mind, how do you balance the scientific insight with folklore and lived experience in the storytelling?
Well, that's initially, like, when I would have been young, obviously you're surrounded by those kind of stories. Everybody's telling you stories about selkies and fairies and stuff. Then I got a bit older and you start to, toss all that sort of stuff out. And obviously I got into marine biology, which is heavily science-based. And so really for a lot of my young adulthood, I'd have been fairly dismissive of a lot of that stuff. But having lived the last 20 years out here and you're talking to people and your own experiences, I suppose the thing with science is as it goes on, you realise that there's whole areas that you know nothing about. The longer you spend studying it, the more doors it opens. And so I'd be a lot less dismissive now than I used to be. So that's sort of the thing of it weaving between the two. That's reflective of my own kind of life as well. And that if you'd come to me 10 years ago and asked about mentioning fairies next to geology, I don't know if I'd have been as keen. Whereas I tend to... Yeah, I'd be much more open to it now.
The series itself was filmed, quite a lot of time has gone into this, over 4 years across Donegal, Mayo and Clare. What was that like, investing so much time into it? And was there any moment during filming that changed how you view the cliffs?
Well, it didn't really... I know it took a lot of time. And while there's 4 years kind of in the making of it, and there's even shots in it that are much longer, much older, it didn't feel like that because myself and Kevin, who's the main cameraman and co-director on it, we live over next door to each other. And basically, it was about recording the lives that we're sort of already living. So almost everything in that documentary is stuff that we were doing, whether we were being filmed or not. So it didn't really feel like work. It sort of felt like a tag on to what we were already doing anyway, So in that view, now as far as changing how I view the cliffs, I suppose the biggest one for me was that I hadn't realised quite how similar Aillte was to Sliabh Liag. Even though I'd been there before, I suppose I'd been younger and I hadn't really understood the geology as well. And once I'm down there now, and I look at the two of them, they're so similar, and the cultural aspects on them are very similar as well. So that I think was the biggest kind of surprise for me.
I guess, when you think of your working life on the Cliffs of Moher as a nature guide, and with, you're guiding people on foot, but now you're guiding a television audience, and then with a lot of nature documentaries, there's an outside narrator, but this story is told from the inside out. So how important is that aspect of it, that you're kind of at the coal face or at the cliff face and bringing this to people, because this is something you've grown up with and that you work alongside these various cliffs along the Wild Atlantic Way?
Well, that was part of the sort of kind of genesis of the idea, really, because myself and Kevin, Kevin was being approached over the last decade for footage, almost any documentary that involves the coast and the sea off the west of Ireland. If you look down in the credits, Kevin's name will feature somewhere. And I was being approached more often by, projects to be like a talking head about some of the aspects of the west coast. And so between the two of us, we had a chat about it. And he'd grown up in Mayo and had spent a lot of time in Achill, and had ended up marrying someone from Achill. And I had grown up on Sliabh Liag cliffs, and then both of us had spent 20 years of our lives down here on the Cliffs of Moher. And so with that kind of conversation, we figured we were better placed than almost anyone else to be telling that story, and that we may as well take a swing at it ourselves,
There's a strong sense of community woven through Aillte as well, the people who live and work along these coastlines. How do you view the human connection and the importance of that human connection, and including that as part of the series?
Well, it's that they're not just a kind of a visual spectacular or solely for wildlife, that these are places that people live and grow up. Like, I grew up on them, and so these are the communities I'd grown up in around. Same with Kevin. And so it was showing that these things aren't separate. Sometimes you can get a kind of a separation between sort of nature and people in a lot of things, whereas in my own mind, they're not really separate. They're tied in through each other. And so those communities and how they interact with the cliffs and how they live there. There's also the idea that these cliffs sometimes are just places that people come to visit and leave. The idea that there's not anybody really living there all the time. And it was to show that, there very much is.
The series captures everything from seabird colonies to deep sea dramas below the cliffs. Is it important to include those? Some people maybe these are hidden or perhaps even overlooked details at times, and that it really brings them to the mind of the viewers once they see the programme.
Well, I think that's a huge thing about Ireland in general, that for an island nation, we're maybe not as familiar with our coastal regions as you get in other countries, Like I often joke when I'm out on tours with people, like, we have a type of crab here, a spider crab. It'd be our biggest crab. And down in Spain and Portugal, it'd be very popular. They'd eat them all the time. But if you were to pick up a spider crab and drive 30, 40 miles inland and drop it on someone's table, they'd think there was an alien. We don't have that familiarity, whereas you could probably drive to Madrid and drop it on someone's table and they'd give you 5 recipes, on what to do with it. We don't seem to have that. So I would have been aware when we're doing this that you're maybe showing people parts of their own country that they mightn't have seen from that sort of angle. And the animals, like the stuff that Kevin's filming underwater and that. Like, a lot of these things are things you can see very close to shore, but I'm aware that a lot of folk just aren't familiar with them. Even people who live fairly close to the coast sometimes aren't that familiar with the wildlife that's there.
Well, they're certainly going to become a lot more familiar once they view Ailtte. Part 1 will be broadcast this evening from 9:30 on TG4. Ailtte described as a love letter to the cliffs of Donegal, Mayo and Clare. As I say, it'll be fairly eye-opening for the people you just described. Cormac, well done to you, to everyone else involved, including director Paddy Hayes and so on. I'm looking forward to seeing it, and thanks so much for taking the time out today to chat to us about it.
No problem. Thank you for having me on.
Take care. That is Cormac Mac Fhionnlaoich, the series narrator for Ailtte. He's a marine biologist of tailored walking tours and talks on Ireland's west coast, the Cliffs of Moher and the Burren, with us on Wednesday's Morning Focus.